This is the after party. Your hosts are the Great Order and No White Guilt. Aren't you glad for that? As for the crown winner of last week, the crown goes to a first-time winner, to Jesse, who gifted a total of 50 Save Those White Baby dollars. Thank you so very much, sweet lady. And we are deeply appreciative of your participation. I'm going to be sharing some of her memes, the hilarious memes that she has created recently. I think this coming Sunday on Going Free. In second place was one of our favorites and regulars, Ohesian Rebel. Or is it Ohesian Outlaw? Which one is it? $10. Thank you so very much, and big congratulations to you as well. Now, you can financially gift on Entropy at a cost of 15% to you, where you can also watch the stream. You can vote on questions and ask your own questions in the question widget, or you can financially gift on Cash App. For both of those URLs, you want to just rappel down into the description. Make sure your carabiners are in place. You never want to have your carabiner in the wrong place. And then you can hop on over and financially gift. And of course, we deeply appreciate every financial gift. And as you all know, unless our guests turn us down, we evenly share the financial gifts with all of our guests on the after party. That is unique among many of the shows, especially in the white spheres. Today, we have on the one and only Karl Thorburn on tap. Now, Karl, will you please introduce yourself to our esteemed community? Tell them where they can find you, the good work that you are doing, and then our one and only Mr. George will take us into what undoubtedly will be a very intriguing and interesting conversation.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me, Jason. Let's see here. I used to be a hardcore libertarian to the point that I was actually one of those crazy anarcho-capitalist types. And this was back in 2012 or so, and I had I'd done the whole Ayn Rand thing. But anyway, I was into finance, and I worked for a brokerage for a time, and then I worked for a bank for a little bit, and I decided after that I preferred cooking, so I became a chef for a while.
All right.
And so yeah, I have a little bit of background on that stuff. But so in about 2012, I saw, I think it was early 2012, I saw a video that Stefan Molyneux had posted on YouTube about Bitcoin. And at the time, I think it was trading for around like $6 per. And I thought, it was an interesting idea, but I thought, well, it could never work because the way the network functions, you have to record every single transaction on the blockchain. And I thought, well, there's no way this thing can scale to a global level, because if everybody's trying to do transactions, it'll clog up. And so I just dismissed it. And then later that year, in like November or December of 2012, I found a group of friends of friends, kind of through Facebook, who were into economics, and they were discussing Bitcoin, and they were saying things about it that I had never really read or heard before anywhere else, and they were making the case that it was extremely undervalued. And so I researched it, and I was looking at what they were saying, and that's the point when I realized that it was probably worth accumulating as many of them as I could. And so at that point, what I did was I actually moved back in with my parents, and I put 100% of my paychecks into Bitcoin for quite a while, because I figured, well, I don't have any responsibilities. I don't have a family. I'm still kind of young, so I can get away with this kind of wacky investment. Now, I don't recommend people do that today, because, unless you're like I said, unless you've got like, you're really young and you're just starting out, you don't have any responsibilities, then yeah, you could have fun with it. But it was in retrospect, it probably wasn't the wisest thing to do. It was sort of a knee-jerk thing, but it worked out well. And, I understand that when it comes to investments and things like that, I am not a licensed investment advisor. So anything that I say, definitely take with a grain of salt, and definitely everybody listening should do their own research and make up your own mind. But I'm going to communicate as best I can what I see in Bitcoin and why I think it's a good idea for pro-whites and white advocates to hold some of their savings in Bitcoin, I think.
Well, Karl, it's great to have you. And yes, you laid it out well. That's the spirit we want to bring to today's show. Jason and I are going to be learning some things along with the chat. So if anyone is tuning in and they're regular people here, we always appreciate that. Or people that are a little new but have been checking us out, because we always know that happens too. A lot of people just don't participate in the chat and check it out, and we welcome you. We love that. It's a specific topic, but we're not going to get too into the nitty gritty. It's not going to be a whole episode. We'll have to, obviously, Karl will have to clarify certain things, but we're not intending to have this be overly technical. It's more of an overview of the concepts. And as Karl was saying, it empowers you to then spark some interest and go do your own research or draw your own conclusions. But from there, it's not only about crypto today, because with the recent short situation with GameStop and that whole thing, it'll give us occasion to talk about high finance in general, and maybe talk a little about the pros and cons. And I have specific questions myself about what the value actually is. I know a lot of people in our spheres are very critical of these kinds of things, and I tend in that direction myself, that an economy should be based on tangible things and ways that you can kind of follow a trail back to something that has some kind of value, rather than just moving numbers around on screens.
Right.
But we will get to all of that. First, Karl, my understanding with the crypto, why it's valuable is just it takes a lot of electricity for a lot of these computer servers to solve these extremely complex algorithms, and that there's only a limited number of the coins in the world. So that puts certain strictures on it. But why don't you just give us an overview of why crypto, and in particular what you are most conversant in, Bitcoin,
Yeah.
Why is it a valuable thing to begin with?
So when it comes to value and like the philosophy of money and where value comes from with regards to money, I recommend everybody look up on Google. There's a great essay called Shelling Out. And it's written by a guy named Nick Szabo, Szabo. Super smart guy. But anyway, he explains in depth the history of money, how it started out. It used to be like the earliest money was like seashells and colored rocks and beads and things like that. But basically, money has evolved over time to it veers toward tokens or objects that are difficult to forge or counterfeit. So the easier it is to fake something, the less likely it is to be able to maintain its status as money. Now, obviously, there are some rare exceptions. Like, for instance, in the case of government money, you've got, cash is relatively easy to fake, but there are extreme consequences for doing it. And also, cash has other benefits. Like, for instance, it's relatively lightweight. It's easy to count. So like with gold coins, if you're trying to buy something with gold, it's way more difficult, because you have to, not only do you have to count the coins individually, but you also have to weigh them and make sure they're the correct density, and it's a hassle compared to cash. So every money has its own ups and downs. And even Bitcoin, like, even though I love Bitcoin, I'm totally willing to accept that Bitcoin definitely has some downsides to it, right? Nothing is perfect. But with that being said, Bitcoin has properties that makes it extremely valuable, in my view. And I think that the real value here comes from its usefulness as a store of value. So you can think of it kind of like a freezer for value or for savings. If somebody had invented like a freezer refrigeration technology back in the 17 or 1600s, it would have been a complete game changer because everybody wouldn't have to worry about, coating their meats in salt or whatever, that they had to do before refrigeration. Well, when refrigeration was created, that changed everything. You could store food for much longer periods of time. In the same way, money, especially government money, has a downward trajectory of value. And even gold has this, right? Gold, people will mine gold at a rate of around 2 to 3% a year. So every year, about 2 to 3% of the total supply of gold is added to the stack by miners. And that actually varies depending on the price of gold. So as the price of gold goes up, miners are incentivized to go and dig up more of it. So they actually increase their rate of inflation for gold. Well, what makes Bitcoin really interesting is that it's the first money that humanity has ever had access to that does not react to changes in demand. So even if the demand for Bitcoin skyrockets, the amount of Bitcoin that miners can produce does not go up in reaction to that. And for this reason, Bitcoin is what you would call in economic terms inelastic. The supply is entirely inelastic. And that inelasticity is what causes these enormous bubbles. But it's also what causes the huge crashes too, because during a Bitcoin crash, even when the demand is going down, the miners continue to produce the same number of Bitcoins as they were producing before, during the big bubble. So you get these big wild gyrations in the price. But on the whole, overall, when you kind of zoom out and you look at the logarithmic chart, you can see that there is a fundamental growth. So I say, if you connect the dots on all the crashes, each crash lands at a far higher level than the previous crash. And that shows that there is So that shows that there is a fundamental growth in demand there. And we would expect, assuming monetary theory is correct, we would expect that over time that pattern is going to continue, and you'll see Bitcoin become worth trillions of dollars. And it will, in my view, I think it's going to become worth that much, even if it doesn't become a day-to-day currency. Like even if you're not using Bitcoin just to go out and buy your morning coffee or whatever, it'll still become worth trillions of dollars because investors and traders and billionaires and governments and anybody like corporations, everybody with large stacks of cash and lots of capital are going to want to use that to store their value as like I said, like a freezer. It freezes value in time. So as long as the network is functioning correctly, and as long as there's no catastrophic disaster as far as like mining or the Bitcoin network goes, it's going to continue to accrete value, sort of in the same way that like a black hole continues to suck in more matter around it.
Karl, if I may, it's still being mined currently?
Yeah, it's got about 140 years left before the last Bitcoin is mined. And so I think right now every block, which is about once every 10 minutes, the network will add 6.25 Bitcoins, I think, to the total supply. And so approximately every 4 years, that inflation rate falls in half. So in the next 4 years, that's going to drop to 3.125 or whatever, and it'll continue halving every 4 years. And it's right after these halving events that you see the big bubbles occur, because that's when what happens is over time, it doesn't happen instantly, but over time, the supply of fresh Bitcoins that are being minted is outstripped or outpaced by static, or assuming the demand doesn't also fall in half, demand will outstrip supply, which knocks the price higher. And as the price rises, that attracts more attention to Bitcoin, which brings in new buyers and investors.
We had a question already from the chat, Be Volkish, but you may have just answered her. Well, I think it's a her. I'm sorry. I'm not sure, though. A question: as soon as there are more sellers than buyers, Bitcoin price will crash. Now, is the halving mechanism that you just described, would that basically take care of that question?
Yeah, but see, okay, so that is what causes a crash, is when you have more people who want to sell than buy. But you have to keep in mind that what happens is eventually you find a floor, and the reason the floor occurs is because there are some greedy people who are watching this crash happen, who are thinking, wait a second, it's possible that the price could go higher from here in the future. And so I'm going to take a risk, and I may not risk all of my money, but I'll at least, throw in maybe 10% or whatever, and buy at this level. And once you get enough people who are willing to jump in and take that tiny risk with a fraction of their total capital, that's when you get the floor. And so from there, that's when the fundamental base is put in, and you start to build from that base again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, so really quickly, if I could just jump in. This is and it's sort of a tangential thought that's running along, so please don't spend too much time on it, brother. But and really thank you for being here. Actually, I have two people who reached out to me because I had questions about Bitcoin and ongoing free, and crowdsourced that. And I'm very thankful for both of those people who have reached out to me, and I will be reaching back out again to both of you. Thank you both very much. Advances in computing, could this potentially undermine the rate at which Bitcoin is therefore mined or mineable? And then also, is it possible for people who are holding currency that's valuable and able to print that currency? So you can imagine however many families or peoples or whatever who are behind the Federal Reserve of the United States or some other country. Is it possible for them to go out and then begin buying up Bitcoin and cornering it in order to prevent it from being a store of value against what they're able to produce? Because people will be able to use their dollars that they print out of their printing machines for the things that they need and the things that they want.
Right.
So just
good question.
Don't spend too long on those. I just wanted to.
Yeah. So first question is probably related to quantum computers, is what they were thinking. But the algorithm that Bitcoin uses, the encryption that Bitcoin uses, is the same encryption that banks and governments and militaries currently use. So if somebody does manage to crack Bitcoin, they're also going to destroy the banks. But in the event that the encryption is cracked, it's not the end of the world, because the way Bitcoin is designed, like I said, is everybody's heard of the blockchain, right? You get a chain of blocks, and each block contains transactions. And so you can think of the blockchain as each block as being kind of like a save point in a video game, right? So in the event of a catastrophe, people will look at the point at which the catastrophe occurred, and they'll say, okay, that's the cutoff point, that's the save point, and then we're going to change the encryption algorithm and build off of that last legitimate block, right? So Bitcoin, I won't say it's impervious to computer attack. In theory, it could happen, but the odds of it occurring through quantum computing are really, really slim. Quantum computing, if you study it and you read about it, it's probably at least 30 or 40 years away from being able to attack something like Bitcoin. And like I said, even the event that it does, it's still something that's fixable. And the second thing I would say is that I think the other question was about people printing money to buy Bitcoins or cornering the market or something. Yeah, governments could do that. And in fact, governments are printing a lot of money right now, as everybody knows. Ever since the COVID thing, people, every government has been flooding the market with money. And that's part of the reason that Bitcoin has bubbled up so much. But it's not, keep in mind that Bitcoin is what economists might call a Veblen good, which is it's a type of good that as the price rises, people want it even more. And so it's kind of like a luxury good in that sense, right? The reason people want a Coach bag or a Bentley is not necessarily because they're the greatest bags and cars, but because the price is so high, it causes them to become even more desirable. As Bitcoin goes up in price, the people who are holding Bitcoins will hold on to them even tighter because they get greedier as the price goes up. And that's why you see these crazy bubbles. So a government, in order to accumulate a lot of Bitcoin, they would have to print a lot of money. And to do that, they would, in the process of doing that, they would create an absolutely enormous bubble in Bitcoin. And especially once people figured out what was going on, they would stop selling. They would just hoard. So yeah, government could definitely get a lot of Bitcoins, but they couldn't corner the market. In other words, it's not possible to do that.
I'm curious about, it's more of an abstract notion, but this notion of value. I know you began with this quick cursory view of money and coinage, and it's hard to forge, and going back to seashells and things like that. And I understand that value is this tricky thing, because you could say, well, as long as enough people agree that something's valuable, then it's valuable. And we know there's a lot of talk now of the fiat currency system that we've been on, and people think that it's kind of this house of cards, of course. And you could say, well, that's not based on anything either, just because the government says so, and it's based on all this debt. As the bank lends out more money, then it creates this money in its ledger. But I'm still going to put the question to you anyway, because I'm sure this will be on people's minds. What makes Bitcoin and other cryptos valuable? Even fiat currency, as much as we can poke holes in it, it's still the very fact that governments of countries we recognize and that have meaning through time, even if we're critical of them. The United States is something that has so much meaning through a continuum of time for the last couple of hundred years that people around the world aren't going to, and there's all kinds of things that go along with that, aren't going to question, well, if the US government is printing more money, they're not going to question the value of that. But the fact that computers are solving complex algorithms that somebody created for that, and there's a limited supply for the next 140 years, who cares? Why did it become a medium of exchange where I can receive Bitcoin from someone and then sell it and have US dollars put into my bank account? I still don't see what is the value? What is this based on? I know that to a lot of people, it seems like it's air, and it's
it's a totally fair question. So what I would do is I would go back to what I said earlier. I would say that, like I said, there's no perfect money, right? Money is a tool, right? It's sort of like you can think of it like a hammer, right? The purpose of the tool is something very specific. You're trying to solve a specific problem. And certain money, for instance, like seashells used as money, is almost like using a pillow as a hammer, right? I mean, you could, in theory, do it, but it's going to suck compared to using a real hammer. So we have a hierarchy of money, and we have a hierarchy of storing value over time. And you're looking for, if you're trying to store value, you're looking for something that, like I said, is difficult to forge and is easy to store, easy to divide, easy to recombine, easy to count, easy to split up, easy to send it over the internet. There's certain properties that people are looking for in a money. And of course, also, you want something that a lot of other people are using as money. And this was very early in Bitcoin's existence, when there was hardly anybody using it. This was a big question on everybody's mind was, well, what's the incentive to use this thing to store value or use it as money if only, 1,000 goofy libertarians are using it, right, for that purpose? Well, I mean, great question. The reason is that it's just a really good tool for that job. It's a great hammer, right? Now, that's not, like I said, that's not to say it's perfect. There are limitations to Bitcoin. There are certain downsides to it. But when you put everything when you take it all into account, you see that even though certain stores of value have limitations, people still use them as stores of value. I'll give you a great example of this. Of course, there is gold, but also there's real estate. Like, there's lots of very wealthy people, like billionaires in China or whatever, will use Vancouver real estate to store their money. They'll go and buy a big house in Vancouver to get their money out of China, and they'll just park it there. They just and they don't actually use the house. The house is sitting there empty, but they're using it as a store of value. So there's all sorts of things that people use as stores of value. They use gold. Like I said, there's all sorts of imperfections with gold. It's easy to fake a bar of gold. There's imperfections with dollars. People have savings accounts, right? So we've got tons of problems with existing money, and Bitcoin solves not all of those problems, but it solves most of those problems. And because of that, we could anticipate with reasonable certainty that Bitcoin is worth north of $10 trillion total. That's just, putting it in comparison with existing stores of value. And so that's my theory, is that I and a lot of other people believe this, that over time, Bitcoin is going to continue this bubble bust cycle, and each bust is going to land at a higher level until it finally kind of fills out as it'll kind of enter the pantheon of gods, so to speak. It's like one of many of stores of value. But the fundamental value of Bitcoin comes from its usefulness as a tool. That's what I would say.
How did it cross that threshold from being this very specialized thing that just a few thousand people use to, again, I can exchange it for US dollars?
Yeah. So it crossed that threshold in a very, what's the word? Kind of a less than ideal way, which is that it was initially used to purchase drugs and weapons and pornography, illicit things on the internet. And so very early on, when Bitcoin was from between, $5 to $250 thereabouts, that was when the 90% of the use of Bitcoin was to just buy drugs. And so that's why I tell people, when a lot of people worry about, they say, oh, the government's going to make it illegal. In my view, it was far more likely that they would have attacked and made Bitcoin illegal back then, when it was actually mostly being used to do illegal things online. Whereas today, it's mostly being used as an investment.
Why wasn't it made illegal back then? What's the thinking there?
I think that they probably, I have my own personal theory about this. Firstly, the normie answer to that question would be that, it was just too small and the government didn't really care much about a tiny thing like Bitcoin back then. But my theory on this is that the CIA and the FBI and some of these other government, like Mossad and MI6, they probably saw Bitcoin as a pretty useful tool to pay deep undercover spies. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Governments and intelligence agencies are looking for ways to compensate people who leak information to them and who do various assassinations and things like that, right? And in the past, the way you would do it is you would just get a big stack of cash and hide it in a tree in a park somewhere, and they would come and find it. This
is going in interesting places. Okay.
Right. So that's a less than ideal way to do it. Now, you can imagine along comes Bitcoin, and I'm sure the CIA was thrilled. They were probably like, well, great. Now we can pay our guys in other countries. And so that's my personal theory.
Karl, I still don't understand why, if I'm a spy, I'm not, I shouldn't say that. They're going to cut that out. If I'm an early Bitcoin adapter and you're telling me, hey, it's Jared, instead of wiring you US dollars or euros or whatever's valuable to you, I'm going to send you this new thing that a few thousand libertarian nerds use called Bitcoin. Why do I care? Karl, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing how the value was created in this little insular circle of a few guys, and now it's used worldwide. And serious financial gurus take it seriously.
Yeah,
help me make this connection, please.
Yeah, that leap from like a libertarian plaything to a sort of a more mainstream investment thing, I think some of that had to do also with Silicon Valley dude bros, who were these young guys in Silicon Valley wanted to start companies and draw a lot of attention to themselves and get investment. And so one of the buzzwords that everybody used was blockchain, right? They would advertise blockchain. And so that might have been part of it, was that you had this period where Bitcoin was kind of not directly desirable, it was sort of indirectly desirable for Silicon Valley types who were interested in this alternative computer network. But yeah, like as far as like paying people, it is possible to sell Bitcoins for cash, right? So if you do have Bitcoins, you can arrange a meeting with somebody who's interested in buying, and they'll give you cash for the Bitcoins. And you don't have to actually exchange identification or anything like that. So I can imagine that's what a lot of people did and still do to this day, is that they meet up at like at a public place, and they'll hand somebody a bag of cash and they'll transfer the Bitcoin. And that's what makes Bitcoin, I won't say fully anonymous, but it can be quite anonymous, because if you're buying it with cash, there is no way to trace it back to you as an individual. Whereas if you're buying it on like an exchange, it's a different story.
And of course, as always, Jason and I will always tell people, and I'm sure you would, Karl, as well, to always stay within the law, be a good citizen. Clearly, absolutely. I mean, they are. You think of it like the government already hates people like us anyway, so don't give them an excuse to come after you. Let's use that to talk a little bit more specifically about our circles here and some questions that might be relevant to listeners. So our circles are going to be more concerned with safety and anonymity than the average population, obviously. So let's talk a little about that. I've seen in comments, I don't know if this is true or not, I'm just passing this along for you to address, Karl, that wallets, even the physical types, can be blocked or targeted. The term I saw was flooded with botnets. So is this true?
No, that's not true. If you have a hardware wallet, the only way to block a transaction in Bitcoin would be to perform a 51% attack on it, which is that would be extremely, extremely expensive and difficult. Really, only a government could do that. And if they did do it, it wouldn't last for very long. It'd probably last for 1 or 2 days before it was stopped. But no, you can't, just based on somebody's address, it's not possible to censor a Bitcoin address or a Bitcoin transaction like you would censor like a PayPal transaction or whatever.
And what about IP addresses being tracked? I saw some commentary about that.
Yeah, so when you broadcast a Bitcoin transaction, it will have your IP attached to it, but there are certain wallet software that makes it possible to do transactions through Tor, which will obscure your IP. And for that purpose, like, you could use, there's on Trezor, if you buy a Trezor hardware wallet, which I highly recommend. I think it's a great wallet. It's a great way to store your Bitcoins, but also Trezor has a suite, like a software suite, an app that you can install on your desktop computer that will allow you to send Bitcoins anonymously. So it goes through Tor. It's useful. But also, I would say for our guys, as far as like sending and receiving anonymously, the best way to do it, assuming you're not buying your Bitcoins with cash, like I said, the best way to do it is just to use Monero, because Monero it's a smaller cryptocurrency. It's much more volatile. But if your intention is just to use it for transactions and you're not making it like a long-term investment, I would highly recommend Monero, because it's by default going to be extremely anonymous. So Monero transactions are such that even if you are an outsider observing the blockchain, you can't see where coins are going and where they're coming from. It's much more obscured than with Bitcoin.
Right. Yeah, I think I've heard you say that it can be done with Bitcoin, but it takes a little more finesse. And so the average person might want to start with Monero. You actually got into a subject I wanted to speak a little more about as well, but on this theme of our particular listenership here and community here. And that is, if I got this correct, you like to keep Bitcoin, and that's obviously your vast majority of your focus when it comes to your cryptos. But then playing off of that, utilize some of the other cryptos for specialized functions, as you just mentioned with Monero, for a quick transaction, if you want to keep it more anonymous and you're new to Bitcoin and you don't want to jump through different hoops. Are there any other cryptos like Monero, as you just said, where you have these little specialized functions for it?
Well, I think
to our guys.
If you're, like I said, if you're not intending to hold on to it for very long, there's a bunch of good smaller cryptocurrencies that you can use that have very low transaction fees. Like there's Litecoin, there's heck, even like Dogecoin. There's a bunch of these coins that have, but my main purpose and my main interest here was I wanted to get white advocates to put a portion of their investment portfolio in Bitcoin, because like I said, I still do think that's going to be the one that grows the most over the next several years. And the reason is because it's kind of like a network effect thing. It's kind of like with Facebook or whatever. The more people that use something, even if you hate it and you don't like it, the more likely it is to continue to grow. It's like a snowballing effect. As far as that goes, yeah, there's most, well, I won't say most, I think like Ethereum, like these Ethereum tokens, these tokens that are on the Ethereum network, I would avoid those. But yeah, Litecoin, Litecoin, and Dogecoin are both pretty good for making short-term quick transactions. Monero is the best for anonymity though. And I don't think a transaction on Monero costs that much as far as like a transaction fee. But like I said earlier, Bitcoin, while it's not perfect, it does have the overall advantage of store of value. And one of its imperfections, one of its glaring imperfections, is the fact that as it becomes more popular, the transaction fees will go higher. But that's not necessarily a big deal as far as its long-term prospects, but it is a big deal for making donations and receiving donations and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So for that very specific element of making and receiving donations for people in our spheres, you would just recommend Monero?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're a rich person, you've got a lot of Bitcoin, you probably will know how to make it anonymous. Like I said, there's ways to do it. And if you wanted to donate that way, you could. So I would still throw up a Bitcoin address for just in case somebody wanted to donate that. But the main thing would probably be Monero right now.
Okay. All right. And I have a question here that is a little messier and bigger, because I know we already live to a large degree in a cashless society. I think most of us, when we go to a store, go to a restaurant, we're swiping our cards and it's all digital, and we check our bank account balances on apps. But I think that if we want to have a full conversation about this and address all of the different concerns that I know people are going to have, I've heard Bitcoin and the other cryptos posited in two different ways, two polar opposite ways, really. One is that it's the most moral thing to do because it somehow sidesteps a lot of this global finance system that a lot of us have issues with anyway. And then second on that, people like us are targeted. You're speaking to two people who have been kicked off of various financial apps and all kinds of things. And then on the other hand, I've heard it said that Bitcoin, even though there is this veneer of this independence and it's decentralized and it's kind of this rebellious thing, that it can and will ultimately be absorbed into this globalist trajectory, this arrow that we see, where they do want this cashless society, and that it fits a little too snugly into that trajectory to make some of our guys feel comfortable. Some of them think that they're actually being led off the cliff like the proverbial lemmings with this kind of thing.
Well, two things I would say to that. The first is that while it is possible to trace or track Bitcoins through a blockchain, it gives no guarantee of who actually owns them. And there's something called CoinJoin, which is very useful for Bitcoin. And in fact, very recently, the Bitcoin protocol has been updated to include a slight change to the way transactions occur, so that when you're looking at a transaction, there's no way to know if the transaction is a mixing transaction versus just a regular transaction. And the fact that observers can't know whether it's a mix or a regular transaction increases the anonymity massively. But what a coin join is basically you get a bunch of people, like generally about 100 people, who all want to mix their coins. And everybody plugs in the exact same number of Bitcoins into a single transaction with a huge number of inputs. And then it spits out on the other side a huge number of outputs, all with equal number of coins. But because it's a totally new set of addresses, there's no way for an observer to know which of the inputs correlates or corresponds with which of the outputs. So you've essentially completely shuffled all of these coins. So there are ways to anonymize Bitcoin, but so it's, in other words, it's less than optimal for the globalists. The globalists, the other thing that globalists would want, but that they can't do with Bitcoin, is that they would want to be able to censor transactions. Obviously, they do that all the time nowadays with our guys, but with Bitcoin, it doesn't matter, who it is. You're able to not only are you able to receive new coins to any address, but you're also able to generate as many new addresses as you want to. And there's no way for an observer to know which address is yours, right? You can just click as fast as you can click your mouse, you can generate new addresses. So it's unless you actually paste that address on the internet with your name next to it, it's anybody's guess as to who owns those coins.
That's not legally classified as money laundering?
No, it's not. Not yet. Now that's just, assuming one day in the future they might attempt that. But even in that scenario, I'm not sure that it would be a lasting solution for them. But yeah, as far as like globalists digitizing all cash and things like that, I think it's something that I think that people shouldn't worry about so much, because it's like, number one, even if you were worried about it, like, what are you as an individual going to do about it? Like, there's really, governments are going to eventually put out central bank digital currencies. China's already done it. I'm sure the US and Europe are going to do it eventually. But so unless you just are protesting against that, there's really no other reason to avoid Bitcoin as an investment. The other thing is like, like I said, the main reason that I think we should get it is because it's a great investment, not because it's necessarily the most anonymous or the best way to transmit money. Like I said, that's probably going to be Monero for now. It's censorship resistant, and it's also resistant to tracking if you're smart, if you know what you're doing.
Okay. Metaphysically speaking, I understand. Look, I have a Bitcoin address, and if someone wants to be so kind as to donate, I take it and I convert it to cash, and I, of course, report it on my taxes. I just still get concerned with this dystopian tar baby kind of thing, where all of the, now we can kind of transition into the GameStop thing, but before we specifically talk about that, there is a lot of concern, and I think very justified, that our system is based on things that are worthless. You're just moving numbers around screens.
Right.
Again, short term, I understand that if someone wants to donate, give a financial gift to me, to Jason, to the show, whatever, through Bitcoin, and it's or Monero, whatever best suits the donator, and then I convert it to currency, that's fine. If that's the method, if that's an angle you can take right now, then fine. But I'm still questioning this idea of getting caught up in a lot of the mechanisms, unless I'm very wrong here, and that's, we're doing, the spirit of this show is just to kind of learn and suss things out, is that
So
are we still dancing with the devil when we do this kind of thing? Or don't we want economies that are based on manufacturing and tangible things again? And yes, you need stocks and ways to move money around in a globalized world.
So what I would say is that you can think of it like money is like a giant spreadsheet, right? And you're trying to basically keep track of who is owed what to who. And with the fiat currency system that we've had since the Rothschild implementation, it's been a really shoddy, awful spreadsheet that's constantly being manipulated and abused by the people who manage the spreadsheet. Then along comes Bitcoin. It's like a spreadsheet again, but instead of being manipulated by a single entity, it's constantly being checked by tens of thousands of computers for veracity. And also, it's possible to deny blocks that are invalid. In other words, if somebody comes along and says, oh, I've got extra Bitcoins that don't have an origin, or I've tried to counterfeit Bitcoins or whatever, the network will immediately recognize that this is an invalid block, and it'll just dismiss it, right? So the nature of Bitcoin is such that it is a more honest version of digital money. Now, we can have philosophical problem with the fact that it is digital and not like something physical like gold or silver or whatever. And that's fine. I'm not gonna, I don't know that I'm smart enough or well-read enough really to explicate exactly why physical currency would not necessarily, or would be on equal footing with a digital currency. But like I said, it goes back to sort of veracity and how difficult it is for fraudsters to come in and manipulate things. With the current system, fiat currency, I mean, it's very, very easy for bankers, and in fact, it's actually built into the system. Banks are encouraged to lend more money than they actually have, right? That's fractional reserve banking. So, you go into banking thinking, well, okay, how is this honest or how is this truthful? It's already a cesspool, right? It's already horrible. So what I would tell you is that even though Bitcoin is digital and you might have apprehensions about that, it's at least a much more honest form of digital money than existed in the past.
Well, I think that is really rounds up that part of the discussion, and thank you for that. I think you did a very good job actually explicating.
Good, thank
you. And rounding out the end of that part of the conversation. I'd really like to get into this GameStop, among other, I guess, businesses that we just had. And there was a lot of confusion about exactly what was taking place, and then how was a stop button pressed, and how were people undermined, and how does the game, who is the game that is said to be fair for all and rules apply to everyone, how can the rules be broken? So what's really going on? Give us your thoughts on all of this debacle that has unfolded over the past couple of weeks.
GameStop has been kind of red pilling for a lot of people when it comes to finance generally. It's like, that's what happens when you have a bunch of amateurs who are new to the whole thing and get into it, and then they're like, wait a second, why aren't we allowed to play the game like the big boys do? And hedge funds for years, like really since the inception of hedge funds. In fact, actually, I think the first example of short selling was way back in the 1600s when stocks were like a brand new thing. But hedge funds have always sold stock short, and they've done it to varying degrees. And but it's only been kind of recently that they've been doing what's called naked short selling, which is, while it's technically illegal in the U.S., it's something that the SEC hardly ever enforces. And this is another example of where the elites are essentially governing themselves, right? They all pat each other on the back. They all know each other, and they all help each other out. And so, except in really egregious situations, they're not going to prosecute each other. And so with the short selling, in my article on countercurrents, I basically gave a simple overview of short selling, which is essentially what it is you pay a small fee to go borrow thousands of shares of a stock, okay? And then the second you receive those shares, you immediately sell them, okay? So you pocket all that money, and then you're hoping that at some point in the future, before your due date is up and you've got to return the shares, the price of those shares plummets. And if the price plummets, you get to go back in, buy the shares back cheaper, and then return them to the rightful owner. You know, there's huge, there's a bunch of folds to this that makes it a little bit more complex, but one of them, and this is an important one when it comes to GameStop, is that when you buy stock on a brokerage app, for instance, like TD Ameritrade or Edward Jones or Robinhood, whatever, you don't actually take possession of those shares. You're not in physical possession of those shares. The broker still has the shares, and they're holding them for you, right? So they get to do what they want to do with those shares. And in this case, what most brokers do, they're sitting on millions and millions of shares of various companies. And so they think to themselves, wait a second, we've got all these shares we're holding for people. Why don't we make extra income by loaning them out to short sellers, right? So that's what happened in this case. What happened in this case was Robinhood and other brokers were loaning out shares that belonged to other people to facilitate short selling, okay? And that short selling ended up causing a huge fire in the system, because some people on Reddit who were intrepid and intelligent noticed that this one company in particular, called GameStop, had way more shorts in existence than shares. So they were short. I think the company was like 140% short, which is not possible. How can you loan out 140% of the total supply of shares? It's just not possible. So they found this and they were like, wait a second, okay, maybe we can take advantage of this. And so they notified everybody on Reddit, and everybody started to load up on these shares, which naturally drove the price a little bit higher. And that forced what's called a margin call, which is basically where the broker goes to the short seller and says, hey, look, your short position is losing money right now. You better get out of it quick. And or the alternative, of course, is you better put up more collateral, right? So what happened is Melvin Capital, which is this hedge fund, they were heavily short GameStop to the tune of billions of dollars, and they didn't have the capital, they didn't have the collateral to put up when the trade started to turn against them. So their only recourse, their only option at that point was to start buying back shares of GameStop. Okay, well, everybody knows what happens when you buy back shares, right? When you buy thousands of shares, the price goes up. So Melvin Capital, it was almost like a Chinese finger trap, right? The harder they pulled, the higher the price would go.
Yeah.
And during this, it was basically like a nightmare scenario, because during this process, not only were they buying shares, but also you had Twitter, you had Reddit. Everybody was jumping in and buying all these shares, and it caused the price to go from like $8 a share up to like, I think it got up to like $300 and something a share.
Wow.
And as you know, that caused Melvin Capital to lose probably more than $10 billion. So they were basically caught with their pants down, and it was really smart. Now see, normally this wouldn't be a big deal. Normally, hedge funds do this kind of thing all the time. There's examples of hedge funds. It's called a short squeeze, there's an example of hedge funds doing this to each other in the past. And in fact, that's actually, it's sort of a roundabout way. It's kind of how George Soros got so rich. George Soros, he kind of did a short squeeze using the British pound, but that's another story. We could get into that another time. But yeah, it's the reason the media made such a big deal of it is because it was the average Joe who was profiting at the expense of hedge funds. And it was essentially a transference of wealth, literally billions of dollars, away from the 0.01% down to a bunch of like college kids and young guys who were on Reddit, you know. And that kind of made it exciting and interesting. But the fact is that you saw this anger. That's what fascinated me, was that there was this huge indignation on Twitter, especially coming from the left, about this. They were like, how dare you take joy and pride in this? Like, you shouldn't be allowed to do that. Well, give me a break. I mean, these people, hedge funds lose billions of dollars all the time, and they attack each other all the time. It's only a big deal when right-wingers and gamers do it.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that fascinating too? I mean, demonstrating the absolute unity between the anti-whites, whether they are the malefactors in the streets and the balaclavas, or operating under different names in the streets, or they are in the tallest towers, gilded from stem to stern. They are in absolute harmony and unanimity against Western kind and Western civilization. And this was another example, and something that they did that revealed their genuine position. And you see this with this Sandy Cortez character. She did the exact same thing. Is they really reveal who they are behind the mask, behind the trench coat, as we said back in 2019 when we said the anti-whites, they didn't just drop the mask, they dropped the trench coat.
Yeah.
And that is their real alliances and their real motivations. As soon as somebody outside of the anti-white oligarchs was positioned, and of course these individuals, some who know, some of them could have been, of course, anti-white, but there were going to be others who were just basic gamer, vague type people. Some would be a white positive. That as soon as they were positioned to take some of this wealth away from the anti-white oligarchs, of course, just an infinitesimal fraction, even though these are giant numbers compared to the kind of money that they wield, especially with the ability to print. As soon as that happened, these people revealed what their true motivations are.
Yeah.
That is
it was like it's like we had X-ray vision or X-ray glasses for a while. It's like, whoa, it's so cool. And I mean, it's exciting because, I mean, really, it's something that's not easy to replicate. Like this is sort of, I want to emphasize to people, like, you can't just go out there and do the same kind of short squeeze on anything, right? It requires a certain alignment of planets to make it happen, right? Mm-hmm. But when you do find it, it's possible to take advantage of. And I think that hopefully in the future we'll see more of this kind of thing. But it doesn't necessarily have to be limited to finance, right? Like there's all sorts of ways to make money off of these people in other domains, right? Especially if you do it kind of a sneak attack in the same way that the GameStop thing was a sneak attack, right? They didn't see it coming, and that's what made it possible to really hit it hard. But yeah, and it got people interested in buying stocks and stuff. But I'm not a big fan of like I don't like trading generally. I think that trading is a bad idea because I think that even very, very smart people are trading. I won't say it's totally gambling, but it's getting close to gambling.
Yeah,
it's getting very close. It's and it's like, the reason I don't like it is because I've seen so many super smart people think that, trading's easy. All you got to do is buy at the bottom and sell at the top. Duh. Right? Well, no, I'm sorry, but it's not. It's way, way harder. And not only is it harder, but here's the thing that makes it really insidious, is that if you're a newbie to trading and you just get into it and you start making money, like let's say you start making $1,000 a day or something crazy like that, right? You're going to think you're way smarter than you actually are, right? And so it lulls you into this false sense of security. Like you get this constant feedback, like you're making the right choices, you're doing the right thing, you know? And then one day you get super, super confident, and you completely blow up. It's just all over, right? And this is one of the reasons that, like, I advise people to stay away from trading. Focus on investing. You know, long-term investing is what you would much rather be doing. Like the example I thought of was Nicholas Taleb. I know you've probably heard of Taleb, who wrote the Anti-Fragile book. It's a good book. He's a smart guy, but I think he's kind of a little bit full of himself, because I think that being a trader, he probably, I think he got lucky a few times, and as a result, he now thinks that he's the expert in all domains. And he's just not. You know, if you can read his Twitter and see that he's completely out of his league on so many subjects, but he thinks he's super smart because he's been successful trading. Now, we don't know how much of that was just luck. A lot of it might have been luck. Who knows? But yeah, focus on long-term investing.
Yeah, it's the aleatory nature of all things in life, and that if you are playing the game, then there is a chance that somebody's going to win, and you might be that somebody, but the odds are minuscule.
Right.
And that's why it's the same thing happens with going to Vegas or anywhere else. It really, where the big boys make their money is before the IPO. They get their shares before they're even
absolutely. And see, let me tell you, actually, I want to mention, that's a great point, because that's something that I recognized early on with Bitcoin. One of the reasons that Wall Street and the SEC hated Bitcoin early on is that it was essentially an IPO that they had no part in, right? So it was essentially, like, you can think of, like, whenever somebody issues new shares of a company or a new currency or whatever, right? Or new bond, it's always issued through a investment bank, right? Like you've got Goldman Sachs or one of these other investment banks they do what's called securitization, where they actually make it into shares. And naturally, when you're the guy doing the securitization, you profit enormously because you get first dibs on those shares. So with Bitcoin, when Bitcoin came out, guess who got the first shares? It wasn't the Goldman Sachs guys. It was a bunch of nerdy white computer scientists and libertarians, right? And so you can imagine these Wall Street types were looking at this and thinking, you know, they're pissed, they're angry because they wish that they had gotten in first. But yeah, and most of the money, when you read about hedge fund managers being multi-billionaires and making tons of money and stuff, you shouldn't think that they're super smart people, because they're not, right? They're not particularly smart people. What's happening is that they have insider information, and they get caught doing insider trading all the time. But you don't ever read about it or hear about it because the media doesn't, want to talk about it too much. But, they just pay a small fine and move on. It's no big deal.
A fine that might seem colossal to us, but is absolutely insignificant to them. Let me say, this has been a magnificent tap episode. We've really been tapped in, but we're getting close to tapping out. So we're going to be taking a look at your questions and see if any financial gifts came in over the course of the show today. And I do want to say that right before we get to that if at any point over the course of the program, we or our guests have spoken to anything that is historical, please look to establishment historians for the truth in all of those matters. And with the same thing when it comes to anything financial, please look to licensed financial advisors, and of course, CNN, MSNBC, Fox Business, and these sorts of places to get the truth about what is taking place in all things financial. You won't get it here. We're just a little YouTube channel. And we know that there are always big ears for some reason aimed at everything we do. In fact, I'll just mention really quickly that I was on the phone I think it was yesterday or the day before, and with someone, and I was taking a look at another channel on YouTube. steadily doing research and thing as such from time to time. And here's this guy. He's got, I don't know, like 400,000 subscribers plus. And he's able to talk about different races of people. He named the races. He's able to talk about all of these different things that if we said it on this channel just 1 second worth, I would see it. I would see the stream immediately go down on the YouTube. But of course, what's the difference? The difference is that we are helping people to go free, to improve their lives, to come together and create a people out of our deracinated race. Whereas that guy is just bitching and giving people a tiny bit of information. So that's the big difference. Let us jump over to entropy really quick, and let's see what we have over there. We have the great Wayne Scully financially gifting $5 US. Well, thank you so very much. Writes here, Bitcoin, in his opinion, has no value. Blockchain is a vulnerable technology, he writes. Stick with gold and silver. You're only getting into trouble if you get involved with Bitcoin. It's a pure speculation at this point, not a good investment, and it is a huge bubble where they don't pronounce the H, which is actually one of my pet peeves. So if you want to get under my skin, folks, don't pronounce the H where you are supposed to pronounce the H. I don't know what is this. Thank you so much, Wayne. Mr. Blow, and then we will get, as we jump through these financial gifts, we have 2 more here, and then I'll go ahead and begin the refresh over here to see if we have any on Cash App, but and then we'll see what if Karl has any thoughts to any of these. And then we have a handful of questions over here from the great Slots, and we have to get to everything he asked because he is such an advocate for white well-being in the trenches every day, all day long, 7 days a week, 365 a year, and as many others are, but he's one of our best. Another one of our great new bests is Mr. Bloom, financially gifting $10. He writes, Prometheus hails to everyone. Very much looking forward to reading Born Guilty and Crucible when both arrive on Sunday. Great show as always. Well, thank you so very much, Mr. Bloom, for that. And you'll have to let us know what you think as you work through both of those. You might be in a bit of a surprise when Born Guilty arrives at your house. It looks a little bit like a cinder block. Just get ready for that. Jessie is back, financially gifting $10. Thank you, sweet lady. And she writes, I've been told it's too late to buy, but the people who got into it first made a ton. If that's true, won't it go downhill from here? Now, that's specifically about Bitcoin. To any of those, Karl, the floor is yours.
I personally anticipate that Bitcoin is going to go up probably anywhere from 20 to maybe 150 times this level. And like I said, that's just based on comparing it to other stores of value. So I think it's still got a long ways to run. And a lot of that's going to occur in the next years. A lot of it's going to occur. Most of it's going to occur in the next probably 6 years or so. But as with anything, it'll naturally the growth will kind of slow over time. But the thing I would tell somebody like that is that look at what's happening with ETFs. So on Wall Street, there's something called an ETF, which is an exchange traded fund. And an ETF is basically like a way for traditional brokerages to buy and sell commodities for their little clients. So basically, just the average Joe who has a brokerage account can call up his broker and say, I want to buy $10,000 worth of gold or silver or whatever, right? What they'll do is they'll buy it through the ETF. They'll buy you a gold ETF. And it's basically just shares in a giant warehouse that's stocked up with gold. Something like this doesn't yet exist for Bitcoin, but it's going to be approved eventually, probably within the next year. And when the SEC does approve a Bitcoin ETF, it's going to basically mean that any normie or any boomer or whatever doesn't have to know. They don't have to know anything about Bitcoin or how to buy it or store it. All they have to do is call up their broker at Edward Jones or whatever and say, hey, could you get me, X dollars worth of Bitcoin? And he'll say, yeah, sure. And it's that simple. The broker will store it for him. And so the fact that that traditional finance and average people are going to be able to purchase Bitcoin through ETFs in the future is enough of a reason to believe that it's probably going to go up significantly from here. Currently, that money is kind of locked out of Bitcoin. So that's what I would tell her.
Very good. Well, thank you for that. And we have over here on the questions widget, we will run through these, ladies and gentlemen. Sloss begins asking, I asked a ton of questions. Maybe Karl can answer all of them somewhere else, or can I contact him off stream? Well, he's going to give his contact information in a few moments, brother. But we will take a quick look at maybe your earliest a couple of questions. Looks like a question for Karl. Can he speak to the two largest threats? What are the chances of a government-mandated Bitcoin alternative or gov.mandated crackdown on Bitcoin like they did with gold in 1933? That's the first question.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's probably Bitcoin's biggest risk, would be a government ban or something. I think that that's unlikely at this point for two reasons. The first is that you generally see these types of regulations and bans occur first in other countries before they occur in Western nations. So like, Iran and China and places like that. China has actually been surprisingly liberal when it comes to Bitcoin. And so I think that unless we see China starting to crack down on Bitcoin, we probably shouldn't anticipate it happening in the West. But if it does, I think that the overall demand for Bitcoin like I said, as a tool for storing value, that fundamental demand is never going to go away. Now, the price will plummet. Don't get me wrong. If a government does ban Bitcoin, especially a Western government, the price would plummet. But I think longer term, you would still see growing demand in other nations and in other parts of the world. And also, you would see people still hoarding it and accumulating it in Western nations also, just sort of away from the prying eyes of the government. It'd be kind of like, I kind of liken it to like cocaine or something. Just because the government bans it doesn't mean that it's suddenly worthless, right? Cocaine is still very expensive. And the similar sort of thing would happen with Bitcoin. It would just go underground. It would have a lot of value, but of course, you also have the advantage too of the fact that like a dog can't sniff Bitcoin. So
that's fantastic. And I think we'll end on, pardon me, this question, and that is from Slots, and that is, what's the best way to avoid transaction fees with Bitcoin, and the method by which you can get your cash or get cash for Bitcoin, the best way to do that. So avoiding the transaction fees and where to go to get cash for your Bitcoins.
So the best way to avoid transaction fees is to wait to do your transaction on a weekend at night or early in the morning. So like Saturday night or early Sunday morning, generally you're going to see really low transaction fees then. And the other thing is just to be patient. If you want to do a transaction, unless it's like really pressing and you have to do it right away, go ahead and set in your wallet software. Hopefully it will give you an option. You should see an option in most wallet software to set the transaction fee. And you can set a kind of a low fee that will make it so that it confirms within 6 or 12 hours rather than within 30 minutes. And so you can set a lower fee. I would recommend there's a website called bitcoiner.live. So it's just bitcoiner.live. And it's a great site to bookmark because it gives you up to the minute what the transaction fees are for Bitcoin at that moment. And so you should just, keep an eye on that. And if you want to make a transaction or a donation or something, or just move coins from one wallet to another, it makes sense to wait until the weekend or keep an eye on that site.
Very good, brother. And would that be the same place then that you would, or is that just monitoring the transaction fees? Or is
that just monitors the fees. To get cash for Bitcoin, like if you wanted to sell Bitcoin for cash, you can go to localbitcoins.com as one good site. You can actually set up just sort of basically put out a small ad on the site, and people in the area who want to buy Bitcoins for cash will you just meet them in public, and you can make the swap. The other way to do it, of course, is just to register with an exchange. Now, with an exchange, your sale is recorded. And so, like we said earlier, you always want to report your sales to the IRS, right? So if you're making particularly a large sale, right, if it's like $1,000 or more, you definitely want to report that, because if they decide to come back and audit you or look at you, they'll nab you for it. So always report your sales. The sales are where the taxes occur. So ideally, you will hold Bitcoin for longer than a year, and if you're in the U.S., because the year mark, if you hold it for 12 months, that's when your capital gains tax falls dramatically. So try to hold Bitcoin for at least a year. If you get it and then sell it within a year, you're going to pay a little bit more in cap gains tax.
Well, there you have it, folks. And we're definitely going to be having Karl back, because there are a lot of questions coming in. And we know that this is an expanding area of interest and influence moving forward into increasingly global economies. And of course, trying to find our way out of this god-awful matrix that the anti-whites have wrapped us in. So let's get your, let's jump over to Jared George, actually, just in case he has something that he wants to throw into you as a question with his final comments, and have him also share with people where they can find him and the great work that he is doing. And let me say, as I do pass it over to the great Mr. George, that he is absolutely, we're talking about value, he is absolutely invaluable to the service of white well-being. He is a true gentleman and champion, an artist, musician, and thinker, and I am always delighted to be able to appear with him. I love him, one of my favorites of all time. And,
great musician. I was just listening to one of his songs earlier. Just fantastic.
Yeah, without question.
Thank you.
Without question. So, Mr. George, your final thoughts, any questions you have for Karl that he can speak to as he wraps up, and let the folks know where they can find you, sir.
No, I don't have any questions. I'm glad people got some value out of it, and I see we have more questions. So hopefully we'll be able to do a follow-up show. I apologize. I was off camera for several minutes. Some people heard smoke detectors were going off, but there was no smoke. It was a little confusing. I didn't want people to worry because they just heard the sirens, but I'm okay. Unfortunately, I didn't hear some of the GameStop discussion, though, so I'll have to go back and listen. I do regret that, because I had my own questions. I had read Karl's essay about that situation on countercurrents, so I did miss that bit of a conversation, guys. I'm sorry about that, and maybe it'll provide fodder for next time. But my site is thegreatorder.com. Everything that I do goes through there to catalog all of my work and how to follow me on various social media. Jason and I always encourage you to follow us in multiple places. We know that we are shadow banned and we have to deal with a lot of different shenanigans. But really, the best thing to do is to bookmark our websites. We don't just have video channels. We have websites. I'm blown away by how there are people with, as Jason said, sometimes 6-figure sub counts on YouTube that don't have a website. Just make a website. Have a way for people to contact you and put your material up there if you're posting stuff. But please do bookmark our websites and get on mailing lists. I only send a mailing out every time I post a song, which is a relatively new venture for me. Not music itself, but doing it publicly, as I think most of you should know, but we always have new people too. And working on the next one right now. And then the afterparty.tv, I should say, is the shared site between Jason and I. You could get on a mailing list there too. Again, it would really be, you'd hear more from us regularly if there was an emergency or if we lost all of our social media accounts. The way we've been using it for the last year since we started doing the mailings is really just every couple of months we just say hi and give you a little digest. The last one, let us know if you got it, because there were some really powerful testimonials. We collected just a tiny fraction of the testimonials Jason gets from the Going Free work and how it's literally saving lives. So that might help inspire you or to show other people why this isn't just guys talking. It's not just guys talking on the YouTube channel. There's a little more going on here. But if you do appreciate that, you've been with us some time, there is one more exciting thing I will tell you, and that is mark your calendars in about 2 weeks, Saturday night, February 20th. Jason, thank you for your beautiful words before too. It's an honor to do this with you as well. As you know, I've spoken to on that subject many times. We're celebrating 3 years of live streaming together, 3 years of doing this show, what quickly became this show. It wasn't called the After Party on the first episode. But back in late February of 2018, it all started when Jason and I started live streaming together. So we are celebrating 3 years. I know in internet years, Jason, we have to do the calculation. It might be more like 15. We are so happy and honored to do this together and with all of you and be learning together and sharpening each other, navigating these times, being realistic about them, but also not getting all negative about it. Hey, look, even Jonathan Bowden said, I was reviewing some of his speeches recently, even Jonathan Bowden said that he thought pessimism was cowardice. So put that in your pipe and smoke it if that means something to you. So even though there's a lot of crazy things going on in the world, and my heart definitely goes out to people struggling with a lot of very real things, we would never, ever make light of that. We try to do something here, and that's what most people tell us when they're on this show or they come into this, is that it's more positive. It's not just complaining about the news, as Jason said. But I don't want to sound like I'm selling it. I don't always do that, but it is on the occasion of just thinking about this 3 years and what it means. And we'll have time to really get into that. We might do a couple of streams that night. We might do some more informal streams later with guests who just kind of come in and out. But of course, there will be an after party, a formal after party that night on Saturday the 20th, where we'll do that kind of structure where we have a lot of our old friends come on, maybe just for 10 or 15 minutes, rapid fire, and say hello and help us celebrate. And we hope to see all of you there. So that's the big thing. That's the big news. Jason, we'll take us out.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. And then we're going to toss it over to Karl before we wrap it up. Tap out tonight for sure. And it's been marvelous. Really, Karl, you have taken, and this is a rare talent, is to be able to take complex topics, complex subjects, and then elucidate them in a way that it becomes attainable and understandable to folks who are neophytes or it's completely alien to them. So thank you for that, and we're definitely going to have you back to explore more of this subject and tangential subjects. Please let folks know where they can find you, where they can reach out to you and contact you with further questions, and where your work can be found, and what folks expect you next.
Thanks so much, Jason. I really love being on the show, and you guys are great hosts and perfect gentlemen. I'm on Countercurrents, so hopefully everybody's already got that bookmarked, but it's just counter-currents.com, and you can look me up. It's Karl Thorburn, just like the god Thor followed by Burn, B-U-R-N. And same thing on Telegram. I was recently banned from Twitter, and I've got a new Twitter account, but I'm not going to plug it because I'm kind of laying low right now. But on Telegram, my Telegram channel is t.me/Karl Thorburn. So it's, again, Karl with a K and then Thorburn.
Perfect. Well, thank you so very much, brother. This has been marvelous. I thank everybody who financially gifted over the course of this show, everybody who had questions and comments as well, even all of you wallflowers who just hung back there and listened or watched and had nothing to say. And a big hello and thank you and welcome to everyone who is new and who will be watching this in the replay as well. We welcome you to participate. This is a community of love, hope, and redemption. Nothing like you've been told before. Big thank you to Roy Danton for moderating, who came in here a little bit late, but he did help with the moderating. Thank you, dear brother. It is always a glorious and wonderful thing to be able to work with Roy, and he can always be counted on. And that's one of the best things that you can say about any man or woman. We've had a wonderful time here tonight, and we will see you again